Hello and welcome to Autology, the podcast that brings you the latest on automotive technology. Today's episode is called The Price of Lithium Ion Batteries Trends and Forecasts. And you're here with me, Amit Pandey, and our speakers for today are Ali Adim and Hugo Cruz, who are our experts on battery research at S&P Global Mobility. Ali, who heads the battery team, joins us from Italy, and Hugo is our senior technical researcher for batteries, and he joins us from Mexico City. So essentially, the three of us are located in three different continents. Hello, Ali and Hugo. Thank you very much for joining today's episode of Autology.
For having me here.
The pleasure is all mine. So, today's podcast is all about the lithium ion battery prices, the trends that we have been taking note of, and what we anticipate in the mid to long term. The lithium ion battery continues to be the single most expensive component in a battery electric vehicle, and the price of batteries hugely rely on the raw material costs along several subcomponents. As we know, we are witnessing a global slowdown in the demand for battery electric vehicles, which are currently sold at a significant premium over their counterparts that are powered by combustion engines. For long, it was expected that once the cost of lithium ion battery pack gets to $100 per kilowatt hour, there will be a sharp surge in the uptake of the battery electric vehicles. Because at that battery pack price, the cost of battery electric and combustion engine cars were expected to be at par. But has this happened? Well, our battery experts will talk about this and much more. So, before we dive deeper into the findings of our report, please tell us briefly about the research methodology and the approach taken to calculate the battery cell pricing data that we have, what battery chemistries we focused on, and markets that we've considered to reach our conclusion. Hugo, you want to take the first question?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's important to mention what was the scope of the research. We are only focusing this research on lithium-ion batteries for electrical propulsion. That includes electrical vehicles, PHEV, mild hybrids, range extenders, and others. Of course, the main interest is battery electrical vehicles because of the demand that they have. We are covering the three levels that are required to be integrated into a vehicle. That is the battery cell, the battery module, and the battery pack. As the cell is the most important part in all this ecosystem, we are considering all the materials with as much granularity as possible. That includes the cathode, anode, but also other subcomponents like the separator, electrolyte, and others. Also in this model, we are considering the manufacturing and financial costs that are incurred by the cell making companies. In this model, we are considering around 30 cathode chemistries, including those that are like mid nickel up to high nickel like NCM 811, NCM 90 plus, also NCA, which is the combination of nickel, cobalt, and aluminum. And also we are including our perspective in iron-based cathodes, such as LFP and LFMP, and even blends, which consider the combination between LFMP plus NCM, which are quite novel chemistries. Also, for the scope of this research, we are dividing it into like regions. That is like all the regions or continents producing or with plans to produce lithium ion batteries. So we are considering historical values for these prices, but also we are like projecting our forecast until the end of the decade. What is the methodology? Well, we are using historical values for commodities. That is the cost of the underlying materials such as lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese. Also the cost of salt batteries that we have been witnessing in the past few years. Also the manufacturing and electricity cost and other factors that could affect the final cost of the production of the battery cells. So in our projections, we are including some effects on the technological processes and material improvements. So we will see like some decrease in the years to come. And we to perform this model, we follow a bottom-up approach. That is like we added all the costs to manufacture the battery cell. And from that, we started building to reach to the cost of manufacturing the cell, adding the cost, the financial cost from the company, the manufacturing cost of the company. Then we added like the module costs, and also we consider the pack cost. It sounds simple, but we had several considerations into our mind, such as the manufacturing size of the factories manufacturing the cells, also which is the chemistry that goes into the cathode, but also anode. What is the production region manufacturing the cells? Because there are like important differences at a regional level. And well, all of this is underpinned by the databases of S&P Global. That includes the databases that we produce in the team of mobility, in the division of mobility, but also with the support and the databases from Commodity Insights. So all this methodology allowed us to produce this model that we believe is accurate and reflecting what is going on in the industry currently.
Please tell me what has been the key results and trends that you've spotted using this model, especially as we are already witnessing a global slowdown in the demand for battery electric vehicles. And what does your model say about the impact of this slowdown on the battery price? Ali?
Yeah, sure. Probably the key finding that our model showed was that we observed a dramatic decline in the battery prices over the last year. The model shows that the average LFP battery price produced in China in 2024 was around $56 per kilowatt hour, which was about 30% lower than just 1 year ago. One reason for this significant price reduction is the rapid decrease of commodity prices. So the prices of lithium, nickel, and cobalt experienced record highs in 2022 due to various reasons like the supply chain disruptions following COVID-19 and also the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This resulted in a small hike in the battery cost for the first time, actually, over the decades in 2022. But since 2022, the prices have declined quite remarkably. In particular, the price of lithium carbonate peaked at $80,000 per metric ton in 2022. And in only 2 years, it has plummeted to slightly over 12K. So the prices of other battery chemistries have also decreased significantly. The price of NCM 811, which is one of the most widely adopted chemistries nowadays, is estimated to be around $69 per kilowatt hour in China, whereas just 1 year ago, it was around $100 per kilowatt hour, or 60% higher. Another reason for this price reduction, as you mentioned, is the slowdown of the EV sales globally, which has resulted in an oversupply, even an overproduction of the batteries. So consequently, the battery suppliers face intense pressure to reduce the prices to avoid underutilization of their facilities and to avoid losing market share to their competitors. The profit margins in China and also other regions in the world have become so slim that sometimes they are barely positive. This year, we have seen numerous reports of cancellations and postponements of the battery projects, which are direct results of this fierce competition and the slowdown in the EV domain. The slowdown and tepid demand have also cascaded over the upper levels of the supply chain. There are several reports indicating that the LFP cathode active material is being sold and traded with even negative margins from the suppliers. And commodity prices have also decreased due to this slowdown, especially since the investments for the expansion of these commodity facilities have been made when there was a much more bullish view, more optimistic view about the growth rates and the future of the battery demand. And now the industry is facing with a slowdown. The players are left with some sort of overcapacity and must endure lower prices.
Right. So slowdown is actually having a lot of impact out there on the supply chain. Please tell us what factors fundamentally influence the price of a battery cell.
Yes, sure. I can take this question on. Well, first of all, it's important to know that the cost of the battery cell represents around 80% of the battery pack. And that is important to know because it's the component that is the most expensive when you compare it against the module or the pack itself. Also, recently we made an analysis and we determined that the average cost per battery pack for a vehicle produced in a Western country is like around 35%. So then you can imagine that if 80% of that vehicle it's coming from the battery cell, it's very irrelevant to focus in the cost reductions there. So what is the most important contributors of the battery cell? First, we have the cathode, which accounts like for around 30%, depending on the chemistry. Then the anode, which accounts like for 20%. But also we need to consider the foils that go in the battery cells. As you may know, some of them, well, they are usually made of aluminum and copper. And between the two of them, it's like around 12% of the total battery cell cost. Why the cathode is so expensive? Because the cathode contains materials such as lithium, and depending on the chemistry, cobalt and nickel, which are commodities that traditionally have high values in the market. The manufacturing cost, after you put like all these materials together, represent around 20 to 30% of the total battery cell costs. This includes fixed and variable costs such as labor, energy, research and development, and depreciation of the assets. Of course, these factors are affected by the manufacturing scale of the cell maker. Also, if they have vertical integration in their supply chain, and also the supplier region. In regions like, for example, China, it's easier to negotiate prices with commodity suppliers as they have a thriving ecosystem for battery materials. So the model that we have developed consider all these factors in order to produce the results that we are now presenting.
Very interesting. Can we just start with the battery metals part? So, how do we see the pricing of key battery metals evolving in the mid to long term?
I will take this one. So first of all, I need to emphasize the significant role that the metals play in the cost structure of the battery cell. So to give you an example, with the current prices, the lithium alone constitutes 12% of the total battery cost. In 2022, when the prices were much higher, this share was 32%. As Hugo mentioned, the material cost overall has the highest share of the battery cost nowadays. And within the material cost, the commodity prices play the largest role. So regarding the commodity prices in 2024, most of the more important battery metals are experiencing market surplus and low prices. So according to Platts from our commodity insight, the lithium carbonate price in China was at around 74,000 yuan per metric ton, whereas exactly 2 years ago, in November 2022, the price peaked at 580,000 yuan per metric ton, meaning like 7 to 8 times higher. Our colleagues at the Market Intelligence estimate that with these current level of the prices, 30 to 40% of the producers are producing actually with a loss. Therefore, it's not so hard to imagine that some of the players on the right-hand side of the cost curve shut their operations to avoid these losses. And this would actually pivot the price trend. On the longer term, as we expect the battery demand to rise, the surplus that exists now is going to turn into a deficit, and as a result, the prices will rise. Nickel is experiencing a similar trend. Market is divulged with abundant nickel, Indonesian nickel. So this together with the tepid demand from the batteries in 2024 has resulted in lowering prices. Just like lithium, low prices have caused some of the players, major players, even like BHP, to announce closures. But moving forward, the surplus is forecast to narrow, and as a result, the prices to rise. Similarly, Cobalt is facing a surplus and low prices, primarily due to the slowdown of EVs and also some major capacity expansions. From the supply side, we have the ramp up of the Tenke mine, the largest asset in Democratic Republic of Congo, and the rise of Indonesian cobalt, which is a sort of byproduct of nickel in that region and has caused a sort of surplus situation in the market. On the demand side, due to higher cost of cobalt compared to other metals like manganese or nickel, and also the stigma that exists around cobalt due to human right violations in DRC. Most of the battery players are trying to refrain from cobalt usage and try to adopt chemistries such as high nickel NCM that has lower cobalt content, or the chemistries that have no cobalt at all, like the LFP or iron-based chemistries. However, despite all these adverse effects, the demand for cobalt is expected to rise in the coming years due to especially the automotive battery demand. And as a result, we expect a deficit in the midterm and rising prices, just like lithium and nickel.
Very interesting. But Ali, I'm keen to understand that although in the long term we expect to see material price going upwards, what would be the impact of the innovations that can reduce the cost at production level? How do you see these dynamics play out over the next decade?
Yeah, sure. Despite all the inflationary effect that I mentioned from the price of the commodities, we still believe that there's some room from the manufacturing cost element that could be lowered in the coming years. Um, some of the cost constituents, such as the capital expenditure or the labor cost, can be lowered through the economy of scale. Battery makers strive to maximize automation as a way to reduce the number of personnel and hence the labor cost. There are also a lot of innovations happening both in the equipment technologies and also the overall battery manufacturing processes. For example, the new modern dehumidifiers that are one of the machines that consume the most in a gigafactory have complex heat recovery systems that slash the energy consumption and therefore reduce the energy cost. Or, for example, we have the modern drying machines that recycle the NMP solvent, and therefore it reduces the consumption of the solvent and therefore lower cost of these additional material costs. You might have heard about the dry coating process that's been developed by many players nowadays, such as LG Energy Solution, PowerCo, and of course Tesla. According to some estimates, dry coating of electrodes alone can reduce the energy consumption at a gigafactory by as much as 30%. Another factor that plays a very big role in the overall cost structure is the level of scrap rate. The gigafactories at their startup can have scrap rates even bigger than 30%. And as they proceed, they can reduce their scrap rates to 15%. But a lot of players actually struggle to go to the levels below 15%. 15% scrap rate means basically 15% of the materials go to waste. So you have to pay 15% more for your material cost. And you should consider that the profit margins already for the battery suppliers are so slim. So a lot of suppliers work with the profit margins below 5%. Therefore, only 5% difference in the scrap rate can have a severe consequence on the economic viability of the project. According to what we have gathered from the market, the players who cannot contain their scrap rates to single-digit values can hardly be profitable, basically. That's particularly an issue for the newcomers. We have all heard about Tesla and how notoriously they've been struggling with the high scrap rates in Giga Texas. And that's been partly due to the dry coating process that has been found very hard to control. But there are a lot of ways that the battery suppliers are trying to reduce the scrap rate. For example, large players, modern suppliers use advanced quality controls and in-house recycling to reduce the scrap and unwanted waste. Therefore, overall, we are dealing with two contrasting effects. From one hand side, as we saw, we have the price of commodities that is expected to have an inflationary pressure on the battery price. And on the other hand, we have all these efficiency gains through the economy of scale and the innovations that are expected to reduce the manufacturing cost. That's why we believe that when we look at the future, the price of the batteries is going to be quite stable. We forecast a quite plateau curve for especially China, that has already achieved a high level of optimization of their processes and high level of scale. However, other regions still have substantial room for improvement, especially those regions like Europe or North America are filled with a lot of newcomers that are struggling to reduce their scrap rates. And as we proceed, we expect that a lot of optimization would happen in those regions. And as a result, some level of price reduction in those regions are expected.
Amazing. That's a lot of information to process. Let's zoom in on the differences of different battery technologies. So, can you please describe how two mainstream battery chemistries, the ones that are most widely used amongst all car manufacturers, it's LFP and NCM. How are they compared with each other in 2024, and how are they different in terms of the cost structure? Hugo?
Sure. For that, let's take the most important cathode chemistry from the NCM family, which is the most popular because of the cost it has and the high energy density that it provides, which is NCM 811. That is the most sought chemistry currently for Western suppliers, and even in China, it is like produced in high volumes. So this will be the chemistry that we will be using for comparison against LFP. And also, in order to start like digging into the numbers, what we are going to do is to compare the values, well, the cost of producing these cells in China versus the rest of the world, which for this analysis includes North America, Europe, Japan, and Korea, and in some cases, other countries that are also jumping into the battery manufacturing. Having made those specifications, let's jump first into LFP. So for China in 2024, as Ali previously mentioned, we found an average price of $56 per kilowatt hour, while in the rest of the world for this year, we estimated an average cost of $81 per kilowatt hour. This cost, we are expecting that they will decrease in the long run. However, like yes, as Ali mentioned, like in the medium term, we will see like some rebound upwards. For China, now let's jump to NCM 811. For China, during this year, the average cost of NCM 811, what we detected in our model, is $69 per kilowatt hour. And in the rest of the world, we estimate an average cost of 83 kilowatt hour, dollars per kilowatt hour. So what we can see comparing the price of China of LFP 56 and China NCM 811 69, we see that there is lower cost for LFP production. The main reason is because the LFP has lower raw material cost. The cathode active material of LFP in general is as half as expensive as the one of NCM 811. And if we put it into other sort of comparison, like the cathode active material for LFP in China accounts like around 25% of the total cell cost, while for NCM 811 it represents 47% of the total cell cost. So you can see here that this comparison that I did before, that is approximately like half as expensive as the cathode active material of NCM 811. And well, what causes these price differences? It's mainly due to the cost of the underlying materials, which is nickel and cobalt, which my colleague Ali previously mentioned that they have generally higher costs, and they are also like subject to these swings in the market, in the commodity markets. Well, what this has caused is that in China, the LFP have helped the rapid adoption of this cathode chemistry. And despite having a lower energy density, LFP has found its way through several vehicles. And interesting to mention here, it's LFP compensates for a lot of like the energy density deficiencies it has as compared to NCM 811 at a pack level. Why? Because the LFP, well, the Chinese OEM manufacturers have found like interesting methods to assemble those batteries into their vehicles that actually increase the energy density at a pack level. So some sort of like compensation happens at that level. So that's why LFP has become quite popular in China. And well, important to mention, like some of the comparisons going to the numbers that we mentioned before, is that you can see that the total production costs in Europe of NCM 811 and LFP are like quite similar. Well, relatively similar at $87 per kilowatt hour and $81 per kilowatt hour, respectively. And this makes the margins very tight for LFP European cell producers. In the short term and currently these years, what we are seeing is like NCM chemistries are preferred, but this might change in the medium term.
Wow, this is some very intriguing data. Yuko, can you also throw some light on the anticipated pricing trend for other chemistries?
Yes, sure. The other chemistries that we are comparing in the model are not currently the most popular, because some of them are like quite novel and some of them are still finding their way into their automakers, but important to mention them. The first one is high voltage mid nickel, and these are NCM chemistries that are like reducing the nickel. And well, they do this through like low cobalt, high manganese, which improves the energy density. And the price is lower than the one of NCM 811. And we will see that this trend will continue towards 2030. However, as it's quite similar to NCM 811, it is still finding like its way through taking a larger share in the market. Another important chemistry or cathode chemistry that is calling a lot of attention because it's an improvement of LFP is LFMP, which is the addition of manganese to the LFP chemistry. So we estimate that the currently LFMP has a comparable price as LFP. In the long run, we estimate that the sale price will be lower than LFP per kilowatt hour, as it has an higher energy density. And finally, high nickel above like 85% content, which has marginally higher cost at NCM 811. So we will see that it will have it will have a marginally higher cost at NCM 811, despite having a higher energy density.
What trends do we anticipate in the battery cell costs for different regions globally? Ali?
Our battery price model shows a quite large difference between different regions. For instance, as Hugo said, the price of NCM 811 produced in Europe was estimated to be around $87 per kilowatt hour, which is 30% higher than the price of the Chinese equivalent products. This price difference is due to various factors, such as higher price of materials in Europe, because Europe, as opposed to China, uh, does not benefit from a robust battery material supply chain. In China, the cathode active materials, anode active materials, the commodities, a lot of battery components like the foils and separator and so on are produced in a quite close proximity, and that reduces the cost quite dramatically. Europe does not have that robust supply chain, and as a result, a lot of components are imported, so subject to transport costs, import tariffs, and so on, and that increases the price of the materials. In addition, Europeans suffer from higher energy costs as well as higher labor costs. So when we compare this 30% price difference with merely 1.5% import tariff, we realize that without additional protection measures, the car makers might simply adopt the Chinese cells to reduce their battery costs. Especially that's important because of all the EV sale slowdown and the fact that affordability has become the most important challenge that the European car makers are facing nowadays. The price gap between the Europeans and Chinese prices have is even higher, considering the fact that there's not a lot of low-cost chemistry offerings in Europe, such as LFP. We discussed the EV slowdown issue, and one of the main reasons behind the slowdown is actually the affordability or non-affordability of the electric vehicles. Therefore, a lot of OEMs in Europe are trying to adopt LFP chemistries, especially at smaller segments like A and B particularly. When we compare the available batteries that are produced in Europe, which are almost entirely in the nickel-based form, and the LFP batteries produced in China, we observe a sheer 50 to 60% price difference. Therefore, most of the OEMs are obviously choosing the Chinese cells for the short term for their affordable car offerings. In the longer term, LFP is expected to be produced at large volumes in Europe, both by Chinese suppliers like CATL that are building large facilities in the region, and also European players. So all European players like PowerCo, ACC are investigating the possibility of producing LFP in the region. However, the price model shows that the European produced LFP, just like what Hugo said, is not so advantageous with respect to other low-cost nickel-based chemistries such as high voltage, mid-nickel NCM, and high manganese LMR that is going to be rolled out in the future. In North America, the situation is completely different. In this region, the battery industry is vastly formed and shaped by the policies, especially the Inflation Reduction Act and import tariffs play a decisive role in the region. The US government recently hiked the import tariffs for the Chinese cells to 25%, which bridges almost entirely the price gap that exists between the batteries produced in China and North America, and for the same chemistry group. On top of that, the Chinese batteries have a decisive and severe disadvantage because of the foreign entity concern that disqualifies all the EVs that utilize the Chinese batteries from the tax credit. And now, with Donald Trump back in power, we need to see if IRA or Inflation Reduction Act stay in place in the first place. He has vowed to abolish IRA. However, the red state actually have benefited the most from IRA incentives, especially in terms of the battery manufacturing investments. That makes it quite challenging to cancel all these incentives. At least the incentives that are subject to manufacturing part and the production tax credit are more likely to be survived, basically.
So far, we've only discussed about the cell prices. Can you tell us about the pack prices, the battery packs? What are the trends in the pack production to reduce the costs?
Sure, I can comment on this. Um, well, we know that the traditionally the cells have been like put into modules, and traditionally the modules have been put into packs, and then the packs are the ones going into the vehicle. However, we have lately seen a trend that is putting the cells directly into the pack, or the cells going directly into the body. And with body, we mean the chassis of the vehicle. And these are known as cell to pack and cell to body technologies. And this is making the battery pack prices going down. As an example, the cell to pack batteries are around 13% less expensive in Europe as compared with their cell module pack configurations. And if we do a similar comparison for China, we find that they are like 4% cheaper, the cell to pack compared against the cell module pack. Also important to consider that new chemistries are appearing, and we mentioned like LFMP, which is becoming like increasingly more important. However, for these newer chemistries, prices might increase at the pack level for the adequate integration of these novel cells. And in the case of LFMP, this is because of its discharge curve, which presents two plateaus. So while it's possible to manage them, the cost pack integration for these sort of cells implies like different challenges at the BMS level, battery management system integration, or other things to be able to control the battery cell performance adequately in terms of like thermal management, for example, and safety of the battery cell. So this might also happen for other newer chemistries that are still like in development, such as LMNO, which is a high manganese chemistry, and this might cause this will likely rise the battery pack prices for these newer chemistries for these considerations of performance and safety. And if we see the cell module pack cost and cell to body, in general, the prices are also decreasing, not as fast as in the cell environment, but we are also seeing like huge leaps in improving like these technologies, considering performance, safety, and reducing the cost towards 2030.
Understood. Lastly, I have one last question that can you explain the cost parity between the battery electric vehicles and the combustion cars in the years to come and accordingly the impact on our global BEV adoption? Ali?
Yeah, sure. So you mentioned in the beginning the infamous $100 per kilowatt hour threshold, which has been always regarded as the holy grail of the battery industry, in which the price parity between the battery electric vehicles and internal combustion engine cars is realized. Our price model actually shows that the total LFP battery pack cost produced in China has reached to $75 per kilowatt hour, which is well below the $100 per kilowatt hour figure. In fact, for small vehicle segments in China, we are already observing the price parity has been already achieved. But for larger segments that have larger battery packs, there's still a gap, but huge improvements have been done. Regarding the threshold, the $100 per kilowatt hour, maybe was meaningful 10 years ago when the prices of the batteries were like 4 or 5 times higher than the current values. But now that we have approached even past this threshold, we need a more nuanced and more clear definition of the battery price parity point. So what we have understood is that there's a huge gap in terms of the battery pack size between A segment and the larger segments. This is due to the fact that when we move away from A segment and go to A and B segments, the vehicle function transforms from intracity transport to intercity. So for larger vehicles, you are more likely to go and have a travel between the cities. And that would dictate to have a larger battery pack size. And that is manifest actually from the data set. So to give you a perspective, in our forecast, battery forecast, the A segment vehicles in China on average have 27 kilowatt hour. And that is 60% smaller than B segment that has 45 kilowatt hour battery pack size. So this illustrates the challenge that we have to face if we wish to reach to the price parity between internal combustion engines and battery electric vehicles across all different vehicle segments for all different types of applications that the vehicle might have. To tackle this issue, for example, the OEMs, in order to increase the range, instead of adopting a larger battery pack size, are shifting the focus on the vehicle and the powertrain efficiency. Also, the battery suppliers are offering novel solutions for faster and faster charging capabilities, and also the battery swap technology, for instance. So both fast charging and battery swap relieve the charging anxiety. And charging anxiety, if is relieved, would allow the OEMs to adopt the smaller battery pack size. So this interplay between the charging anxiety and the range anxiety is quite fascinating. And it seems that we have a sort of virtuous circle. And if we improve one, the other one is also alleviated automatically. So far I talked about the Chinese story. We saw the price gap has been narrowed, and we have also the price parity a bit for small segments between battery electric vehicles and internal combustion engines. But in Europe and North America, the situation is quite different. According to our estimates, the price gap between the BEV and ICE in the US and in EU is even larger than 30%. Especially in Europe, since we have aggressive carbon emission targets and ICE ban in 2035, this price gap should be reduced substantially by the OEMs in order to increase the adoption rates. So some low-cost technologies by the OEMs, such as LFP, should be adopted as soon as possible. And also the governments should increase and continue to have the incentives in order to bridge this gap. Looking into the future, as the car industry is undergoing a dramatic transformation, it is imperative for the Europeans and North Americans to nurture a local supply chain for the batteries if they want to remain competitive with their Chinese car manufacturer counterparts.
Wonderful. This was a very interesting conversation, and I can go on with many more questions, but unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today's episode. A big thank you to you both, Ali and Hugo, for taking out time from your busy schedules for joining Autology.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And thank you to all of you listeners for tuning in as well. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode at our email, which is autology@spglobal.com. And you can find out much more at autotechinsight.ihsmarket.com. Don't forget to hit the subscribe, follow, and like buttons to stay on track with the latest Autology podcasts. And we look forward to you joining us again in the next episode. Bye for now.